chapter 6, where we're going to look at methods and procedures for conducting your research, and we're going to focus on determining your sample. And in this chapter, we're going to cover a lot of terms that will be on your test, so please pay attention to that and make sure you take good notes. So first, we're going to look at population. And population is everyone or thing that exists that could be studied related to research. So if we say the population of Lubbock, we're talking about every single person in Lubbock. So if we do a survey, we cannot get everyone in Lubbock to respond to our survey. So we will not survey the population, we will survey a sample of the population. And the population is a set of relevant observations or component units. So as we've done before, if we were looking at relevant observations of the population, that would be if we looked at every single person and observed what they were wearing. Component units can be people, mice, visual displays, or just a few examples. And can anyone think of who tries to survey the entire population? The one person that does is the U.S. Census. However, they are not successful at getting everyone to fill out the survey. So, as I just mentioned, we cannot survey the entire population, especially we're looking at millennials or Generation Y. We cannot sample the entire population, so we are going to do a subset of the population, which is your sample. And the larger your sample, the more valid your results. So think of cheesecake from Cheesecake Factory. When you go to the Cheesecake Factory, you usually don't buy a whole cheesecake. You just get a sample of the cheesecake, a slice of it. So our slice is a sample of the subset of the population of the people, products, population, or occurrences that you're studying. And so if you're thinking of your piece of cheesecake, you want to get a big enough piece of the cheesecake that you get the crust and the edges of the cheesecake, which means you want your sample to be big enough to give you valid results. Next is the term element. An element is the individual person or thing that is part of the sample. So the element is just each person who takes your survey would be an element. So for your study, you need at least 30 elements. Next is the term homogeneous or heterogeneous, and that's the two type of populations you can have samples. You can have a heterogeneous sample or a homogeneous sample. And a heterogeneous sample has diverse characteristics. So if you looked at all Texas Tech University students, they would be diverse because they would have different majors, different minors, and they would come from many different states, cities, countries. So that would be a heterogeneous population. A homogeneous group of population or a sample have similar attributes. So for example, a heterogeneous would be TTU students in general. A homogeneous sample would be if you looked at all retail majors. And they would be considered homogeneous because they all have the same major, which makes them have some similar attributes and characteristics. The next term is sampling, and it looks at how and who is selected for your study. For your observation study that you did in Unit 1, you could have looked at every third person, every female, every student that walked by. So with sampling, you want to have a systematic method in selecting your subjects. So if you did do every third person, you used a systematic method. You can also do professional sampling, and this is when you use a database, and it's a database that has tons and tons, thousands of different consumers' information, and you're going to divide this huge profile of different people by income, gender, which would be demographics. You can also look at how often they shop online, so that would be different lifestyle characteristics, and that's how you is another type of sampling. So looking at two types of sampling, you can either have probability sampling or non-probability sampling. Probability sampling is random sampling where each person has an equal chance of being selected for your study. So an example of probability in a real life situation would be a raffle. Like if you had a raffle and everyone in the entire school received a ticket, then each person has an equal chance of being the person that wins the raffle. And with probability sampling, it's referred to within research as random sampling. While non-probability sampling will not apply to the entire population, and it only tells about a limited population, and you choose in advance who you will put in the sample when using non-probability. So an example would be if we did the same raffle and we gave everyone a pink piece of paper and one person had a yellow piece of paper, and then we put them in a raffle. Then you're using non-probability sample because there was not an equal chance of everyone being selected. And your survey will be non-probability sampling because you're only surveying people who you know. So they fit within your sample population, but you're only doing the people that you know, so it's non-probability because you're not able to do everyone that fits in your population. So now we're going to look at some methods for probability sampling. So this is which would be random sampling. So for your study, you would not actually use any of these because they're probability sampling, and your study will be non-probability sampling. However, you need to know the difference between these different types of sampling. So first is simple random sampling, and this is where each subject in the population has an equal chance of being selected. And the techniques used to select subjects include using a table of random numbers. So like if you numbered everyone from 1 to 200, then you would randomly pick through those numbers. You could use a lottery system where each element is identified by number and then randomly selected by picking from a pile of numbers. Next is stratified random sampling, and this is when the population has been divided into subpopulations or strata, which where they get the word stratified. So you could divide, say if you were going to look at different types of retail stores, then you would divide them by department stores, off-price stores, specialty stores, and kind of look at them based off of those types of stores. And you could determine purchase intentions. You could also divide families by income and select a sample from different incomes to study. You can also divide people by age and study an age group's behavior. Next is proportional stratified random sampling. And with this, your population has a higher proportion of people in a certain category. And this is necessary to select people based on this proportion. So as we said, we're looking at Generation Y, but then you could say your subcategory would be college students. So then that would be a form of having proportional stratified random sampling. However, we're not reaching all college students, so we can't say that it's probability sampling. Systematic sampling would be subjects that are selected on planned sequential basis. So this would be where we talked about where you include every fifth person that walks through the door, you would survey them. Or every third customer approaching a cosmetic counter, you would survey them. And then last is cluster or area sampling, and it's used often dividing by geographic areas. So it could be everyone in a town. You're going to sample everyone in this specific town, or you're going to interview everyone in a specific neighborhood. Next is non-probability sampling, which is the form of sampling that you will be doing. First is accidental sampling. And this is where you use what is available to you. So you use the first 20 people who enter a laundromat to do their laundry, is who you would interview. Or the first 25 people who walk into the sub is who you would interview. And then next is purposeful or judgmental sampling. And this will probably be what you will use for your study because it uses a specific group. So you would say you used the first 30 people that fit your age range for your study and had purchased something online, would be an example of purposeful sampling. Or if you were going to do a study looking at people who wore tennis shoes and how brand affected their purchases, you would do the first 30 people who turned in your survey who wore running shoes at least twice a week. Now we're going to look at understanding your sample. And when you look at your sample, you have different demographic characteristics that you can look at, psychographic and generational characteristics that you can look at. So first, if you look at demographic data, you can look at your demographic. You could have a demographic cohort, and it's collected on your population, and it provides vital statistics, and it can include age, sex, gender, income, education, race, ethnicity, household composition, place of residence. Next would be your psychographics, and this is the lifestyle of your population or sample, and it looks at what type of activities one engages in, how one spends their time. So if you were looking at footwear and you wanted to see how often people worked out that wore tennis shoes, you could look at how many times they go to the gym during a week, or how often do they wear tennis shoes to class. So you're looking at their lifestyle of exercise and looking at also how they dress to go to class. Do they dress up or dress down? Next is generational cohorts, and they're used to group people into categories using demographic and psychographic data. And by understanding the demographics, psychographics, and generational cohorts, you select the appropriate sample for your research study. So for your generational cohort, you're going to be looking at college students or millennials, and they will have specific age, income, and education demographics. They will tend to be single, going to college, which are psychographics because that affects their lifestyle. Next is this is a table which is on page 105 of your book, table 6.2, and it looks at variables that deal with demographics and psychographics, and it looks how these different demographics and psychographics affect a person's fashion choices. And kind of like we talked about before, you're going to have to find demographics and psychographics of your sample because this will affect the different things that you'll be asking them. So if you're asking them the type of store they shop in, do they shop in online or in store, that can be affected by their demographics and psychographics. If you want to look at how much they're willing to pay for a certain type of item, that will also be affected by their demographics and psychographics. So those are just different things that you want to find because they are going to relate to your study and affect your results. Who collects demographic information? The U.S. Census, as we mentioned earlier, collects data every 10 years of the United States population, and it provides a database of information about the population and housing. And this information is used by the government to determine how many seats are in the House of Representatives for each part of the U.S. And also, government agencies and local and state government organizations also use this information. And businesses and retailers use it to learn about different areas and demographic populations. So, why collect demographic data? Well, the government uses it for public policy and programs, but retailers use it to collect demographic data So, for example, a lot of times retailers will ask you your zip code, and they're doing that because they want to determine your household income for that area, your gender, your age, and they can do that from the results that they get to determine what consumers in that area want in their store and how to better target those consumers. And they also use it to determine where to put new stores. So an example would be Walmart uses their demographic data quite well. When we used to live in Midland, there was a Walmart on one side of the town that mainly had more Hispanic products to target that population, while the Walmart at the other side of town had totally different product for their Caucasian market that was more prominent in that area. Now we're going to look at the multidimensional marketing matrix, and it is divided into 5 different values. First are cohort values, and if you look in your book on page 107, table 6.3, there's 7 different generational cohorts that have been developed, and you're looking at things that people value, and this is based on their historical and lifestyle experiences. An example would be your children will not have the same lifestyle experiences as you did, since they will not know about life without a cell phone, and they won't know what it was like when 9/11 happened. So those things, even though you don't really think about them, have affected your lifestyle and affect your experiences, which in turn affects your choices and the different things that you do in your life. And it comes down to even consumer behavior and how it affects what you buy. Next is life stage, and this is your role, and it will change over your lifetime. So right now you're students, and right now my role is as a parent, while my parents, their role is a retiree. So whatever your life stage you're in, this affects your attitudes, and attitudes in return can affect your behavior. Next is psychographics, and these look at changes in your body's appearance and functions, and these will change with age. An example that would kind of explain this would be when your kids are little, or when you were in junior high, you grew a lot. So when you grew a lot, how this affected the retail industry is that your parents were having to buy clothes for you all the time. And they had to have, that retailer needs to have a ton of different sizes within this age group because they're continually growing and continually needing new clothes in different sizes. While if you look at someone once they're grown, their size doesn't change very much from year to year. Another psychographic with your body changing would be when you're pregnant. You need totally different clothing than what you have now. So that's why there's stores dedicated just for maternity wear, because you have to have different clothing usually whenever you're pregnant. Next is your emotional and affinity effects. And these are your priorities. And they change over your lifetime usually, because an example would be once you have children, your focus changes more from, especially when they're little, from being on yourself to being on your kids. So how that could affect retailing is before you may have spent a lot more money on your appearance and your clothing. However, once you have children, that focus changes to them, and then you'll spend more money on children's clothing and their appearance than you necessarily do of your appearance. And last is looking at the dimension of socioeconomics. And it looks at financial, educational, career, material, and other social and economic states. And an example of this would be looking at you as a student, a college student. You're different from your high school peers who are not in college. Down the road, they will not be able to have the same careers or economic status as you have. Their financial status will probably not be the same as yours. And this will also, in turn, affect their lifestyle, their experiences, their psychographics. And this last slide just talks about When you develop your questionnaire, you need to determine your sample's basic demographic categories and psychographic lifestyle so you can determine how that affects what you're studying. So you need to be thinking about what questions you're going to ask for race, gender, age, income, and then look at what questions you're going to ask about their lifestyle and psychographics and how that's going to affect your study. So an example would be if you want to look at income and how that affects college students' purchase intentions versus, say, college students um, who are already graduated and working full-time. So you could find that there's a big variation in income and spending habits between college students who just go to school and don't work, and even college students who work full-time or already graduated and have a full-time job. And this concludes chapter 6.